Thanks for coming. This is the fifth in the series of Winter Series in Aging, our 19th year, named after Dr. Lebeber, who I explain every week was a general internal medicine physician in Galveston who worked hard to get the university to build a geriatrics program back in the 1980s. And so his family gave a bequest in his honor after his death to establish a lectureship. It was actually one lecture a year, but then when we formed this big lectureship, we decided we'd name it after Dr. Lebeber too. And Nancy Hughes, his daughter's general internal medicine physician in town, and always arrives 5 minutes late, but she was here on time today. So tonight we're very happy to have Dr. Luis Rosero-Bixby join us to talk about aging in Costa Rica. He's currently at Berkeley. But he spent most of his professional career in Costa Rica. He was raised in Ecuador and went to the university undergraduate in economics at the Catholic University in Quito. And then he moved to Costa Rica, where he helped found, I'm going to get the name wrong, but it was the Central American Population Center in Costa Rica. He's been an incredibly productive investigator and a very strong force in promoting demography and the study of populations and the study of aging in Central America. He then somewhere in his career, he then went back to University of Michigan and got an MPH in international health and a PhD in population planning. And he's been professor and director of the Central American Population Center for many years. And then he stepped down and retired. They have sort of crazy retirement regulations in Costa Rica, just like we do in some places in the U.S., where he found out he could make more money retired than he could here. So that's when he moved to Berkeley to continue his research there. And so he is collaborating with Rebecca Wong, one of our investigators who studies aging in Mexicans and older Mexicans. Cocos Marquides over there studies aging in older Mexican Americans. And so we're very happy to have Dr. Rosero-Bixby come tell us about aging in Costa Rica.
Thank you for the nice presentation. Thank you for the opportunity to be here, especially thank you to Rebecca who invited me. I'm going to talk about the healthy elderly people of Costa Rica. I am going to try to convince you that they are indeed healthy people with three aspects of life expectancy and mortality in Costa Rica, or three characteristics, are first that life expectancy is higher than expected given the Costa Rica development level. And I am going to explain what this means. And another characteristic of the health situation in Costa Rica is that although infant and child mortality is low, elderly mortality is exceptionally low. And a third characteristic I am going to talk today is that there is a region in Costa Rica, the Nicoya region, in which these peculiarities concentrates, and it is known as one of the blue zones, as is called by the National Geographic, of exceptional longevity. Other blue zones are Sardinia in Italy or Okinawa in Japan. Nicoya is one of these areas of exceptional longevity according to the National Geographic, and is in Costa Rica. So, Costa Rica is a tiny country in the Central American Isthmus. You can see there. It has coasts on the Pacific Ocean and the Caribbean Sea. The country is about 20,000 square miles, capital city in the center. There is like 150 miles between the two coasts, and the Nicoya region is on the Pacific coast. Several million years ago, this was an island, but now it's part of the territory. And this figure, which is a classical figure that first was presented by Professor Sam Preston, shows the relationship between per capita income or gross domestic product in purchasing power on the one hand, and the life expectancy on the other hand. And you can, each point is a country, and you can see that the higher the GDP per capita, the higher life expectancy is. And you can also see that there is a trend line, the expected level of life expectancy given the level of GDP per capita. And there are some underachiever countries like South Africa, Botswana, Swaziland. These countries were affected by the AIDS epidemic. And there are some overachievers, and one of them is Costa Rica. Costa Rica has a life expectancy of about 80 years, a little bit higher than the US, but with an income of only $10,000 per capita in purchasing power, compared to the almost $50,000 of the US. Other overachievers are Vietnam, if these numbers are correct, or Israel, or Japan. And Costa Rica has been a study case for several decades. In the 1980s, there was a relatively famous book by the Rockefeller Foundation titled Good Health at Low Cost. And this book was about the extraordinary cases of Costa Rica, Sri Lanka, the state of Kerala in India, and China. And in these countries, the level of health was way higher than expected given the level of development. So this has been known for several decades, and Costa Rica is there. How Costa Rica reached that level? Here we have a comparison between an average of life expectancy in more developed countries. You have the list of more developed countries I included here. This is the average of them, the evolution during 100 years. The average for Latin American and Caribbean countries, and Costa Rica. Okay? And you can see that 100 years ago, the difference was huge between Latin American countries and more developed countries, like 25 years of difference in life expectancy, 55 of life expectancy against 30 years of life expectancy. And this gap has been closing out. And nowadays, the difference between Latin America and more developed countries is like 7 or 8 years only. Costa Rica always have had a better level than the average of Latin American countries, but during the 70s, something happened in the country that moved away of the level of, say, Latin America and reached levels of more developed countries. This has been studied, and the main factors for this were very aggressive primary healthcare program and the universalization of the social security system. So Costa Rica is there with a life expectancy similar to more developed countries since about 1985. But there is also another characteristic I already mentioned, which is that if you look at life expectancy at older ages, say life expectancy, remaining life expectancy at age 65, and compare this value with the infant mortality rate or the child mortality rate, it happens that Costa Rica has exceptionally high levels of life expectancy at all ages. All the blue points are more developed, 13 more developed countries in the period from 1950 to today. Each point is a country, and for each country there are several points. And here we have the trajectory of Costa Rica. When Costa Rica had 120 per 1,000 infant deaths, its life expectancy at age 65 was like 15 years. But the expected value, given the levels observed in more developed countries, was to have something like 13 years. And so on and so forth. Nowadays, and this is for males, for females it's a little bit different. For males, nowadays, infant mortality rate is 10,000 per 10 deaths per 1,000 births, and life expectancy at 65 years is like 18 years. And at this level of 10, of infant mortality of 10, what is expected is something like 15 years of life expectancy. So Costa Rica has an extraordinarily high levels of life expectancy, or a high longevity at all ages, or a very low mortality at all ages. Well, some demographers think that is just bad data. They don't believe in this. They think this is bad data, and as often happens in less developed countries, people tend to exaggerate age, and when people exaggerate age, there are lots of people at very old ages, and the mortality rates are artificially very low. So a question is if this is true or just is an artifact of bad data, and we are going to examine that. So it's very important in this presentation and this discussion about the exceptionality of Costa Rica, first of all, to validate the estimates. And one thing that we are going to present here, and we have been doing for several years, is to use in our investigations only documented date of birth data, which come from the iCard of our subject of research. We never use reported ages because of this problem of exaggerating age. And with this information, we are going to present the results of 3 different investigations, 3 different research. One estimates are from what is called extinct cohorts. The idea here is to use the information of people who have already dead and reconstruct the cohort back in time, and to compute mortality rates at very old ages, say after 80 or 90 years of age. And the information used in this methodology is only from the death registry. There are no census data, or no the possibility of having wrong information about the age of the individuals. Then I am going to present some information from another research which we call the longitudinal mortality study. There is a similar study in the US, And this study, it has been following up about 15,000 adults from a sample from the 1984 census, and another sample of 7,000 individuals from the 2000 census. We are following these individuals in the computer registry of deaths, and again we are using only information from date of birth from the birth registry, not the reported age in the census. And finally, we are going to present also data from a panel, a survey we started in the year 2004. It's called the CRELES panel. There are similar studies for Mexico, for instance. It's called the MHAS study, and there is a famous also study for the Hispanic population in the US, and also for the US population. So in this panel, we have 3,000 elderly Costa Ricans, older than 60, and we follow them starting in 2004. We visit them 3 times in their households. We took a blood sample and a urine sample, did several examinations, and also we are following them in the death registry to check survival and life expectancy. So a key element in all these studies is the cedula or the ID card, which all Costa Ricans have. Here you have a picture of the cedula for this guy, Mr. Emiliano. He was born in 1909. So we have the birth date here in the cedula, and that's what we are going to use. And in addition, we have the number of the ID card, and this number corresponds to the number in the registry book, which is in the registry system of Costa Rica, which exists since 1883. I am showing this book to a famous demographer, Michel Poulain, a few years ago, convincing him that the information in the cedula is exactly the same information that is written in these books. And this information of the number tells in which book and which page in the book is registered this person. So in addition of the date of birth, we can check also when this person registered, and in our studies, we left out all the people who are registered late in life. There's about 3 or 5% of people who are registered several years after birth, some people even several decades after birth. We are not using that information to avoid problems with age. So we are pretty well sure that we are using the right ages for these people. So with the information from the extinct cohort estimates, we published a study in demography, and this was the main finding we published there. We found that at the age 90, the remaining life expectancy, which is about 3, 4, or 5 years, depending on the country, or if you are a woman or a man, in Costa Rica may be the highest life expectancy for men in the world. You can see here that there is no other country with higher life expectancy than Costa Rica, and I am including here only the more developed countries with good data. For women, Costa Rica has at these ages a similar life expectancy, which is about close to 5 years, than in Japan or in the US. US have a pretty high life expectancy. So this is a very interesting finding. How come a poor country be that good in longevity? With this same data and same methodology of extinct cohort, we use a technique that epidemiologists use to detect pockets of concentration of high levels of cancers or some diseases. It's called the SAT-SCAN methodology. And the purpose of this study was to find out whether there is a pocket or there are several pockets of significantly lower levels of elderly mortality in the country. And this is levels of mortality in the 1990s for people over 75 years of age. And we found two significantly lower pockets of low mortality. One was the pocket of Nicoya, which included these 5 cantones, with a relative risk of death of 0.82. That's it. That's it, like 18% lower mortality than expected, given the level of general mortality in Costa Rica. We found another one close to the San Vito town. This was a small town founded by Italian immigrants, and this is even lowest. Is a relative rate of 0.66. That is 34 lower mortality than the rest of the country. But the problem with this pocket is that the population is very, very, very small here. It's less than 10,000 individuals. So here is very difficult or almost impossible. We don't have the numbers to conduct demographic studies. So we took this information, and this is what served for the National Geographic to decide that Nicoya was another blue zone as it is Sardinia or Okinawa. Now this is the information from the longitudinal study, and I am comparing here the results of this for the period 1995-99, and we have here the mortality rates of Costa Rica and the longitudinal study in the United States with the corresponding confidence intervals. So we have these little things which are the rates of mortality, and you can see that for males the rates and the mortality rates of Costa Rica are lower than the rates in the US. Significantly lower since there is no overlap of the confidence intervals, especially after age 65 or so. And here you have also the information from the whole population, the official life tables, and you can see that our sample represents more or less well the general population. So mortality is lower for males at all ages in Costa Rica than in the US. That's not the case for females. There are overlap in the rates, and basically we have the same mortality rates in the two countries, which is also very interesting because the income level in Costa Rica is substantially lower, or what Costa Rica spends in health is like 1/20 or what the US spends in health. The numbers using regression and so on and so forth are here, and basically what we have is that mortality in Costa Rica for older individuals in age 65 to 90 is 18% lower than in the United States. And this is significant since the confidence interval does not include the number 1. Okay? So 18% lower mortality at all ages in Costa Rica compared to the US in the 1990s. For females, there is no significant difference between the two countries. The number 1 means that mortality is the same in the two countries. Then with the same data set, the longitudinal data set, which had overrepresentation of Nicoya, we did some estimates of indicators of old age longevity. And I am presenting here life expectancy at age 60 for males and females, and an indicator of the percentage of centenarians, or what we call the centenarian rates for the 60-year-old. And this is the percentage of people 60 years old that is expected to reach 100. In Nicoya, our estimate is almost 5% for males, 4% for females, with a confidence interval, because we are working with a sample, and life expectancy about 24 years in males and females. Very small difference between males and females. And we compare this information with some other hotspots of longevity like Sardinia and Okinawa, and we can see that life expectancy is substantially higher than in Sardinia, in Nicoya, and a little bit higher than in Okinawa. But for females, the Nicoya is not, the Nicoya level is not special. It's high, but it's lower than Sardinia or Okinawa, lower than Japan as a country, and only 1 year higher than the US. And when you compare this indicator, the probability of reaching 100 for a person 60-year-old, the differences are huge of Nicoya compared with other countries. Say, compare with the United States as a country, the probability of reaching 100 for a 60-year-old is 10 times higher in Nicoya. And of course, in Okinawa, what is exceptional is the situation for women. Almost 10% probability of reaching 100 for women in the island of Okinawa. So these are the results for Nicoya, about the exceptional longevity in Nicoya. So why mortality of elderly Costa Rica men, and particularly Nicoyan men, is so low? Let's explore some possibilities now. First of all, let's look at the causes of death. Here we have the distribution of causes of death, the evolution of this distribution for the whole population in Costa Rica since 1930 to the present time. And you can see how important were in the past the infectious disease mortality. Almost 3/4 of all deaths were caused for things like malaria, diarrhea, tuberculosis, that type of diseases. And this type of diseases represent only 5% nowadays. Focusing now on the population 40 to 90, and in the data from the longitudinal study, and comparing Costa Rica with the USA, we have essentially the same distribution. Very few infectious disease mortality, 5%. Most of mortality is due to cancer, and especially cardiovascular diseases, some other chronic diseases, external causes, and all the other causes. In the US, the percentage of deaths due to cardiovascular disease is higher, 42% compared to 38% in Costa Rica, as well as in cancer, 29% compared to 26%. But in Costa Rica, other chronic diseases, particularly diabetes, is higher than in the United States. Also in Costa Rica, external causes, accidents especially, are higher than in the US. This is just the distribution of deaths. The study of the death rates result in this figure. We have here the death ratio between Costa Rica and the US. A ratio of 1, indicated by this line, a ratio of 1 means that the two rates are exactly the same. And these computations are controlling for age, basically. And we have males and females. Blue points and the confidence intervals are males, and red are females. Here we have the all-cause mortality that I showed you in the table before, with 82% lower, or 82% rate ratio for Costa Rica, and rate ratio that is not significantly different of 1 for women. But when we look at the rate ratios for cause of death, we can see that in cardiovascular diseases, men have substantially and significantly lower mortality than the US. The same for cancer, for males and females. And in cancer, the specific type of tumor that makes this difference is lung cancer for males and lung cancer and breast cancer for women. In some cases, Costa Rican elderly have higher mortality rates. That's it, higher than 1 rate ratio, particularly for external causes, accidents and so on, males and females, and these chronic diseases, like especially diabetes. I am including kidney disease, liver disease, diabetes, and chronic respiratory diseases in that group. I also made an estimate of all the causes that have relations with smoking: cardiovascular diseases, respiratory cancers, cancers of the mouth, emphysema, that type of deaths. And Costa Rica definitely, elderly Costa Ricans definitely have a lower level of mortality for males and females for all these smoking-related causes. For non-smoking related causes, women have even a higher mortality than in Costa Rica than in the US. And now let's look at data about socioeconomic status. Here we have data from the same data set, the longitudinal mortality data set for Costa Rica and the US, and we classify all the individuals with a socioeconomic status, SES rank, which is mostly determined by the educational level, and within each educational level, the quintile of income. So we order all the individuals from the lower SES to the higher SES, with 0 for the lowest one and 1 for the highest, and compute the mortality rates for individuals relatively young, 40 to 64, and older individuals, 65 to 90. These are individuals in the US which are covered by Medicare, as you know. And what we see in this figure is that the slope of the curve of mortality, of the reduction of mortality with socioeconomic condition, is substantially smaller in Costa Rica than in the US. In other words, inequality in health is substantially smaller in Costa Rica than it is in the US, which means also that individuals in the lower levels of the socioeconomic scale are substantially better off in Costa Rica and significantly than in the US. Significantly lower mortality rates in Costa Rica than in the US. But at the highest levels of the socioeconomic status rank, the situation is the contrary. Here we have that United States individuals have, Costa Rica individuals have higher mortality than the United States. If Costa Ricans have the slope of the socioeconomic effect as in the US, they would have mortality like this in lower socioeconomic states. But that's not the case. The slope is like this. And at older ages, the socioeconomic status effect is lower in Costa Rica and in the US than at younger ages, but still in Costa Rica, the situation of inequality is more favorable than in the US. Yeah. There is a measure derived from these estimates, which is called the relative inequality index, which is the quotient, the ratio between the lowest level of socioeconomic status and the highest level. And this ratio in the US is more than 3.4. So mortality at the lowest socioeconomic status is 3 times higher than at the higher socioeconomic status in the US. In contrast, in Costa Rica is 50% higher. This at these adult ages. At older ages, the inequality index is substantially lower, 1.6 in the US, 1.1 in Costa Rica, and this value is not significantly different of 1. So basically there is no socioeconomic gradient at ages 65 and over in Costa Rica. There is a studies for European countries that have computed this indicator, mostly for individuals comparable to the 40 to 85. And they have found that in Europe, the highest relative inequality index are found in Eastern Europe with values above 3. So the United States have levels of inequality in health similar to the highest levels in Europe, which correspond to the eastern countries of Europe. The lowest levels of these indicators in Europe are in the southern countries, Italy, Spain, Greece, and in that countries this indicator is less than 2. So Costa Rica have this result similar to the one observed in southern countries of Europe. And at all ages, this inequality even disappear. So this is part of the story. And to finish, let's do some comparisons of selected health risk factors in Costa Rica and the US. I am going to use the CRELE survey I mentioned at the beginning, and for the US I am going to use the NHANES data, the cohorts 1999-2002. And I am going to study mortality in the following 5 to 7 years in these cohorts in Costa Rica and in the US, and for samples with ages at the beginning of the study of 60 to 85 years. The sample size is 2,000 in Costa Rica and 3,000 in the US. With this sample size, we will not be able to observe a small difference, says rate ratios of 1.1 or 1.2. We will be able to observe only a big difference, 1.5 or so, or things like that. Okay, before showing you the results of the survival analysis, here we have just the distribution or the prevalence or some we can call health risk factors. Some people consider that living arrangement can be a health factor. That, for instance, living alone at all ages is not good for your health. So in Costa Rica, and these numbers are controlled by age, with regression with standardization methods. So in Costa Rica, 9% of these elderly live alone, 16% in the US for males, and 12 and 34% in the US. And in contrast, very few elderly people live in households of 3 or more members, basically with children. Only 21% of males and 20% of women. But in Costa Rica, 60% of the elderly live with children. Huge difference. Most of elderly US citizens live in households of 2 members, the emptiness. In the US sample, the people in institutions are not included. Smoking. Basically, there are no difference in the prevalence of smoking, former smokers and current smokers, males. 51% are former smokers, compared to 55% in the US, but current smokers 17% and 15%, and this may be just a sampling error. No significant difference. For women, there are big difference and significant difference. Smoking is substantially higher in the US than among Costa Rican women. Obesity measured by BMI, substantially higher for males in the US, 31% compared to 17% in Costa Rica. About the same for women, which is very high in both countries, 35%, higher than in men. And another measure of obesity is central obesity, which is the waist circumference, and is considered obese the women with waists of 88 centimeters or higher, and male with 102 centimeters or higher. 22% of elderly Costa Rican males are obese according to this measure, compared to 53% in the US. The difference between women is not higher, is very high in 2 countries, but there are no difference between the 2 countries. And another indicator, which is the hypertension. Hypertension measured and according to the medical diagnosis. So we have this classification, and according to this, about 1/3 of men and 1/4 of women are no hypertensive. So hypertension is higher among women at elderly ages. But the classification of hypertensive women show that among men in the US, a higher percentage have controlled their hypertension. What this means is when we took the blood pressure measure during the survey, they were okay, but they had a diagnosis of hypertension and they were taking drugs against hypertension. Okay, so they have controlled hypertension, and the percentage are higher in the US. The uncontrolled hypertensive individuals are higher among males Costa Ricans and females Costa Ricans, as well as the proportion who has not been diagnosed, but they have high blood pressure in our measure. So let's see how these indicators act on mortality. And I am falling now in heavy stuff. These are the results of hazard regression. And what I am presenting here is the effects measured by the hazard ratio of the different health factors using Gomper's regression. And basically what we have here is that in the US the effect of smoking is different than the effect of smoking in Costa Rica. And we have the two sets together because we found that statistically there were no difference in separating men and women in the sample. So with the two sets together, individuals who are former smokers have 47% higher mortality in the US compared to never smokers, while in Costa Rica there is no significant difference. And current smokers in Costa Rica have 33% higher mortality rates, but in the US they have 3 times higher mortality. Why is that? We don't know. We don't know why smoking is less damaging in Costa Rica than in the US. We didn't find an effect of waist circumference measured with these two continuous variables. No significant effect in the US. A small effect in a curvilinear effect in Costa Rica, but this is small. So obesity is not really a factor for mortality at all ages. And for blood pressure, we found that there are higher levels of mortality, 54% higher and 82% higher mortality for those even who have controlled hypertension in the US, and even higher for those uncontrolled hypertension. But here we found an interaction with gender, and if these were women, the situation will reverse and there is no effect for women of uncontrolled hypertension. The effect is only for men, and this effect is in Costa Rica and in the US. In Costa Rica, there is no higher mortality for controlled hypertensive individuals. So translating these results of this regression in some specific groups is easier to interpret the results. Here we have, for instance, the mortality rate for individuals who are 75 years old, this computed with a model in the previous table, 75 years old, living in a couple in the lowest socioeconomic status and never smoking, waist 95 centimeters, these are males, and no high blood pressure. The death rate is basically the same in Costa Rica and the US. But if we move to former smokers and all the other indicators the same, we found that mortality in the US is 34% higher than in Costa Rica. And if we additionally move to controlled high blood pressure individuals, males, we found that in the US, mortality is almost twice as big as in Costa Rica. If we move to the highest socioeconomic status, there is almost no difference for this group of males, etc., between Costa Rica and the US. So, basically the difference between the US and Costa Rica is because of the higher mortality in the US of low socioeconomic status individuals, of individuals with high blood pressure, and individuals who were former smokers. And finally, yeah, I have time. This is an analysis of the biomarkers of the individuals in Nicoya. Here I am comparing a series of almost 20 biomarkers of Nicoyans with Costa Ricans, with the rest of Costa Ricans. And these are results of the regressions. And levels to the left of this red line means that in Nicoya, this biomarker is lower. And if the confidence interval doesn't overlap this red line, means the difference is statistically significant. The units of measure are standard deviations, whatever that means. Okay. So we have that Nicoyans have lower, significantly lower levels of disability as measured by activities of daily life indicators, significantly lower levels of triglycerides if they are males, lower levels of cognitive decay, significantly lower levels of glucose, lower levels of total cholesterol, of the ratio total HDL cholesterol, and significantly lowest levels of this indicator of blood sugar also. And also they are thinner in their waist. Here we don't have significant difference between Nicoyans and the rest of Costa Rica. And for these indicators, we have higher biomarkers for Nicoya. This one, and probably this is the most interesting, is telomere length. Length of telomeres among Nicoyans is significantly higher than in the rest of Costa Rica. They also have higher levels of this hormone, Diaz hormone, and they are also significantly taller as measured by knee height. And this is a exchange results. For females only, the levels of depression, geriatric depression, are substantially higher in Nicoya than in the rest of Costa Rica. I don't know if people, if women are tired of seeing of all these guys, yeah. But this is something that we should investigate. Okay. Summing up, we have exceptionally low mortality of elderly males in Costa Rica, and it looks like this is not a data artifact. And this is concentrated basically on males only. Mostly of this advantage come from cardiovascular disease and lung cancer. Smoking, hypertension, and low socioeconomic condition are much less damaging in Costa Rica than in the US. We don't know why. So we are not talking here about the distribution of the difference in the prevalence of this health risk, but in the effect these health risks have in Costa Rica and the US. The effect is different. Obesity is not a factor. In spite of the huge difference in prevalence of obesity, this does not affect the levels of mortality, the difference of mortality between Costa Rica and the US. A possibility is that the use of statins and other drugs have made that in the US obesity is not a factor for mortality. I don't know. And finally, we have that elderly Nicoyans have live longer. they are really longevous and have a metabolic advantage, are taller, and have longer telomeres. So this is what we know at this time about this, I would say, exceptional longevity of Costa Ricans and Nicoya. And to show you what I am talking about, this is a picture of one of our star participants in the study, the Abuela Panchita. When we took this picture, she was freshly 100 years old. That was 7 years ago. A few weeks ago, she was 107 and was still in very good shape. Perhaps one of the most interesting things about this woman is that this is a poor woman, as you can see in their living conditions, her shoes and everything. She lives by herself, she does her own duties at home, but this is the type of people who live in Nicoya and in Costa Rica and who are extraordinarily longevous. Thank you.